Hello, everyone. I'm Sasha Boehner. I'm an EWP student here at CIIS, and I'm going to be serving as your moderator today. I'll be ringing a tiny bell after 15 minutes and again at the end at 20 minutes, unless we've spoken individually about it. I'll be keeping us on time, but it's with great pleasure that we have these speakers this morning, and we're going to begin with Ananta Giri, who will be presenting the topic Cultivating Contemplative Civilization and a New Civilization of Love and Ahimsa, Global Responsibility, and New Initiatives in Healing, Justice, Dialogues, and Planetary Realizations. Ananta Giri is a professor at the Madras Institute of Developmental Studies, Chennai, India, and we're so pleased to have him here.
Namaskar. To join this mantra of Madhu with gratitude to Debashis and all friends co-present, let us offer ourselves to this walking and meditating the challenge of sustainability, contemplative civilization, and Sri Aurobindo with an interlinked mantra, which we can sing it like this: Om Contemplative Civilization Madhu, overcoming and transforming the poison of civilizations and unsustainability, a new civilization of love and ahimsa. Om civilizational Santi, civilizational Santi, civilizational Santi. Thank you, dear friends. With generosity of Debasis, he kindly mentioned that I can have your generosity to offer some thoughts up to 25 minutes, and with humility I wish to accept it. And as the PowerPoint is coming, and I wish to begin this journey with contemplation with a line from Stanley Cavell, the great philosopher who is also a non-philosopher. And he writes, it is coming, and I paraphrase his statement when he says that Homer's, the old copy of Homer, is still lying on Thoreau's table in Walden, which suggests that in philosophy, meditation comes before contemplation. Thoreau's copy of Homer is open on his table at Walden, so far as philosophy is a matter of caring about text. But it is not only caring about text, peoples, and civilizations. Meditation is its mark before argumentation. With Gyani Bhatimo, another great savant, at the horizon line of the near future towards which we gaze pragmatically, assessing the utility of truth, there lies a more distant future that we can never really forget. Rorty alludes to this with the term solidarity, and one interlinked conception is in the context of discourses of civilizations, right from Toynbee, which builds upon an unspoken distinction between civilization and barbarism, and class of civilizations, we are in for contemplative civilization as a pathway to civilizational commons and solidarity, which I propose to read directly in the sense of charity and not just as the means of achieving consensus, but as an end in itself. Christian dogma teaches that Deus caritas est, charity is God himself. From a Hegelian viewpoint, we may take the horizon to be that absolute spirit which never allows itself to be entirely set aside, but becomes the final horizon of history that legitimates all our near-term choices, which has its invitation to walk and meditate with Sri Aurobindo via the challenge of state and spirit, which includes a critique of the Hegelian imprisonment with the state-centered absolutist spirit. And today, the crisis of civilization is linked to the crisis of state as well. Our civilization are in crisis, and we need new initiatives in cultivating a new civilization and new civilizations. Our dominant civilizations are entangled in multiple waves of domination and violence towards nature, the divine, self, and society. As Walter Benjamin challenges us to realize, every document of civilization is a document of barbarism. Sri Aurobindo, in his human cycle, also challenges us to realize the physical and economic barbarism in modern civilization. And Gandhi challenges us to realize its satanic dimension and transform it. And one interlinked note about Gandhi's critique of civilization in Hind Swaraj is that as Gandhi critiques modern civilization as satanic along multiple lines, including state violence, which resonates with Sri Aurobindo's critique of state in human cycles. But what Tolstoy here challenges us in his letter to a Gandhi, and it's so letter to a Hindu, which so fascinates Gandhi that Gandhi started translating that. Tolstoy, in his letter to Taraknath Das, he says, okay, you want to get rid of British colonialism, but what about getting rid of caste? So the point is that the critique of civilization, especially as Sri Aurobindo brings Asiatic and Indian civilization, the resources of that, as a critique of the colonization of the Euro-American civilization. Therefore, the critique of modern civilization also has a responsibility of critique of caste and gender domination in all civilizations, including Indian civilization. And that genealogy of critique is a profound critique of civilization, starting from Jyotiba Phule to Ambedkar. And there is profound affinity between Ambedkar and Sri Aurobindo, as one scholar suggests that Ambedkar's critique of caste draws from a profound critique of caste that Sri Aurobindo had forwarded in Bande Mataram around 1908. This needs also to be read together with Freud's civilization and discussions, Tagore's crisis of civilization, and anthropologist Stanley Diamond's In Search of the Primitive, a critique of civilization. Modern civilization is also mindlessly activistic, lacking a meditative dimension. The modernistic logic of self-reflection is not reflective enough and is imprisoned within a logic of self-justification, reproduction, and assertion. We need meditative movements that would help us transcend our many prisms and prisons of closure and realize multiple waves of freedom, responsibility, healing, and liberation, self, social, and planetary. We need to cultivate contemplative civilizations which embody creative action and meditation, and at the same time become evolutionary dances of meditative verbs of co-realization. Contemplative civilization become parts of movements of civilizational transitions, where our major challenge is to move from structures and discourses of violence, violation, and disrespect towards multidimensional vision, discourses, practices, and institutions of ahimsa, love, and non-violence. And here, quickly relating it to the civilizational discourses, my friend Ian Netherman Pieters at UC Santa Barbara in a recent essay writes, not much later, after Winston Churchill's encounter with Afghans, Arnold Toynbee presented cities and civic cohabitation as a criteria for civilization. And cities require agricultural superproduction and centralized administration. An implication is that those who do not do agriculture and do not live in cities are outside civilization, savages, barbarians at the gates. According to Qin and Han dynasties Chinese, there was need for a great wall to protect China's fertile cattle. And American Western movies often cast Native American warriors of the plain, the Apache, Shios, and others in the same light, savages outside the gates of civilization. Now, today, the journey with and towards contemplative civilizations required a profound acknowledgement and transformation of that discourse, which is a violent discourse, that the dualism between civilization and barbarism. And I am joining you from the gift of Arizona, where I was yesterday. And just before boarding the flight, I came to this museum where the Hakoko people have built such a canal, and the present day canal builds on that. And not to forget that, and therefore, just to bring another line from my friend Jan, yet the poetics of empire are a tad selective, nomadic peoples to have built civilization. And of course, here we must not forget the the Harappa and the Mohenjo-daro civilization, and the kind of the networks, and the contemporary, the living archaeology shows that even the river had a port. But the point to link Sri Aurobindo with the Harappan and the Mohenjo-daro civilization is that what you find in Harappan and Mohenjo-daro civilization is the yogi, isn't it? And therefore, the yogi is the symbol of this civilizational journey. And Govind Chandra Pandey, G.C. Pandey, great scholar of Indian journey with humanity, writes about it. And he talks about Atma Sakyatkar Yogi as the nurturer of civilization. To this, I invite us to cultivate not only the Atma Sakyatkar Yogi, but Saha Sakyatkar Yogi. That means a yogi which is meeting Atma Sakyatkar and mutual acknowledgement. And who is a yogi? Our dear friend, Professor Chappell, and in his recent book called The Living Landscapes, he has this profound line about the yogi. He says, a yogi is one who lives outside the social confine. But that doesn't mean that indifferent to social responsibility. So, linking that, we can realize a yogi, and I propose a new yoga with civilization and a new civilizational yoga, which builds upon this tradition, a yogi who lives outside civilizational confines, and which means a yogi who has the courage to interrogate the foundational violence, that is the dualism between civilization and barbarism. Moving on, here I quickly bring Louis Henry Morgan. In his great work of 1851 or so, he writes, among the Indian nations where ancient seats were within the limits of our republic, the Iroquois occupied the most conspicuous position. They achieved for themselves a more remarkable civil organization. Please note, a remarkable civil organization. And therefore, my submission is that our discourse of civilization itself has been too state-centric, and therefore the dialectic between civilization and community, city and the forest. And time being short, I would not read, but Morgan himself challenges brings us the challenge of European colonization. And then he writes, they fell under the giant embrace of civilization, victims of the successful warfare of intelligent social life upon the rugged obstacles of nature, and in a struggle which they were fated to witness as passive and silent spectators. But today, our journey with civilization, what I call as a new civilizational yoga, is to transform that fatalism of history into destiny. And that destiny is what I propose is a new civilizational Savitri yoga. And it's in Savitri, Sri Aurobindo building on the epic, which is part of Mahabharata, and brings Satyavan to life. Today, our new civilizational yoga of Savitri is to really heal the wounds of civilization, and in a kind, and then to create also life, but also here not to forget the challenge of cultivating a new civilization of life and death. Because one of the inadequacy of modern civilization is a cult of life which has forgotten the art of dying, which is a source of violence. And so here, Sri Aurobindo writes the epic Savitri, which is in Mahabharata. But Mahabharata begins with one very brutal, reality, that is the burning of the Khandava forest, isn't it? I invite us to understand the violence of civilization with the burning of the Khandava forest. And today, the sustainability question is linked to the burning of the forest, isn't it? Which is going on. When President Bolsonaro was in Brazil, there was a state-sponsored burning of the Amazon forest. In India, an anthropologist has written a book called Burning the Forest. And the contemporary, our glorification of Indian civilization should not take us away from the reality that the forest dwellers today, their land and forest are being taken away by the collusion of state and market power. And Tagore points to that in his Crisis of Civilization, isn't it? Tagore talks about that he says that one of the realizations I have is how can such a civilization, which has so many beautiful words about itself and the world, it can be so indifferent to unseeable poverty that is there among Indian people. And he says that this poverty has been created by the colonization process. And today, contemporary India, the condition of the indigenous people is not very different from that, including the whole political act to change the Forest Rights Act that was crafted with a lot of pain and suffering. So moving on then, here Stanley Diamond, in his Critique of Civilization, he finds inspiration from Rousseau. To Diamond, anthropologists are spiritual double agents because anthropology is both an academic discipline and a search for human possibilities. I wish to submit that in a same way, we can work and meditate with Sri Aurobindo, but which is a different from what a critical friend of mine challenged me. It is different from a reproductive practice of adding Sri Aurobindo as a footnote or an endnote. And my submission is that the challenge before us as we celebrate Sri Aurobindo is to work and meditate with Sri Aurobindo rather than just to add Sri Aurobindo. And it is in that spirit, let us not forget to ask a question. Now, this question has not been asked in our trial of civilization. Toynbee himself wrote a work called Civilization and Its Trials. That is, that the burning of the Khandava forest, who we are involved, Lord Krishna, and the great celebrated hero Arjuna. And because they would have to just fulfill a promise, which was a conceit, Agni comes, I would want to eat. And then Agni says that I would not be satisfied with chicken tikka masala. I want to eat the whole forest, isn't it? And then both Krishna and Arjuna, Indra sends rain. And what is the nature of the promise that we have? Yes. So, and then, so it is in that context that we have not asked this question. Now, Draupadi the whole disrespect to Draupadi starts with the destruction of the forest. I do not have time to go into. But as Sri Aurobindo experiences the presence of Vasudeva in the prison, today let us experience the presence of Vasudeva, but ask this question: are you not in complicity in the destruction of the forest? So moving on quickly, as we have the gift of 5 minutes with us, let me quickly outline some further pathways of our journey. For example, also rethinking the discourse of axial age civilization from Karl Jasper, which in fact also built upon the destruction of mother goddesses. And then Eisenstadt and axial age and Toynbee, all of them build upon a dualism between civilization and barbarism, which we read a new Advaita of civilizational engagement. And it is in that context, a scholar, W. Beren, has written a book called On Civilizing America, which we need to today, that like Ivan Illich talking about deschooling society, we need to uncivilize our civilizational journey so that we can build contemplative civilization, which can draw inspiration from many works, including two, Jeffrey Sachs. Though he is an economist, he wrote a profound book called The Price of Civilization, where he talks about the economic illusion, which can be read together with Sri Aurobindo's critique of economic barbarism and Rifkin's work, Empathetic Civilization. Very quickly outlining the pathways of a new civilization of yoga, I begin with the challenge of transforming the dialectic of state and spirit to a yoga of state and spirit. Then also a new yoga with power and suffering. Toynbee himself says that the problem of history lies in the idolatry of power. And here, though Toynbee builds upon the civilization barbarism, he says to save civilization, we would have to refer to the higher resources of religion. Very quickly, therefore, as we are in this yoga of power and suffering, we bring Sachidananda as a co-participant in this power and suffering. And therefore, with Sachidananda, we move towards a Sachidanandic civilization, where with a Savitri yoga, which also requires a yoga with violence and non-violence. And here I want to invite us to talk about many initiatives towards a non-violent economy. Last year, I was part of an initiative from Ekta Parishad in Madurai, a non-violent economy, non-violent state, which also requires an engagement with renunciation and engagement, transcendence and immanence. Time being short, I want to bring what Devashish calls transcendental pluralism into the conversation. Again, I do not have time to elaborate, but to say that today's civilizational journey has to be plural. And that plurality also is associated what is called civilizational transition. And that civilizational transition, according to Arturo Escobar, is a movement of pluriversality. Just 2 to 3 minutes. I would conclude in the next 3 minutes. And that kind of, it also requires a new yoga with space and time. Dialogue of civilization. Fred Dallmayr, including our friend Richard Harge, who has written a book called Clasp of Civilization. And then a new Savitri yoga, as I mentioned, and that Savitri yoga, building on giving birth to life and saving life, can relate to Hannah Arendt's work of nativity, natality. And we need a new generational creativity. And the Club of Rome today has an initiative called a New Emerging Civilizational Initiative, where the challenge is to build a new generational contract, which we can transform it as a new generational yoga. As Amartya Sen says, and I am concluding, that the limits of contract is contract itself. How do we today a civilization of contract to a civilization of yoga? Finally, I would conclude with this, just this thought that in terms of ahimsa, maybe this is not coming. Just give me a minute. So it is a line from Habermas. Here, Buddha, Gandhi, Habermas, and Sri Aurobindo dance with Luz Irigaray, John Dewey, Charles Peirce, and Ambedkar, and challenge us for a new civilization of friendship. As Habermas challenges us, only when philosophy discovers in the dialectical course of history the trace of violence that deform repeated attempts at dialogue and recurrently closes up the path to undistorted communication, does it further the process whose suspicion it otherwise legitimates mankind's evolution towards autonomy and responsibility and towards contemplation and contemplative civilizations?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I wanted to also say thank you, Keika, for the beautiful chants. I didn't say that in the beginning. And now we're going to turn to our next speaker, Glenn Alparicio Perry, who's going to be presenting on Auroville in the United States, microcosm and macrocosm of unity and diversity. Yes. Well, the time, how would you like us to handle it, Debashish? Do you want 5 minutes? Okay. Okay, sure. Sure, sure. Ananta, would you like to come back up? Sure, sure.
Yeah. Is there any markers in the past, evidences of this new civilization in the past that we can look to for guidance?
Your good name, please?
Ricky.
Ricky, thank you. With your generosity, is it okay to gather a few questions together? Just keep. Okay, thank you. Yes, for example, uh, what Tagore called as forest-based civilizations. And they were practices, and how in forest-based civilizations, there were ways of living and learning, living in coexistence with nature and other kind of communities. Similarly, I was referring to Iroquois and many kind of our indigenous civilizations here. They learned how to coexist.
How do you see the new civilization merging these?
Beautiful. In fact, like literacy and technology, and in which orality, in fact, this whole distinction between civilization and barbarism was around the written and the oral, one of the axes. But today we realize the profound kind of unavoidability of the oral in that sense, and therefore the oral culture, and like linking it to, for example, what Devasis called as the Upanishadic, and I have my humble journey with called the Upanishadic of thinking, the oral. So therefore, that is certainly, and today the challenge before us is how do we really walk and dance with the oral speech, for example. I didn't have time to bring on that. A new yoga of speech and silence. and Sri Aurobindo's book, Origins of Aryan Speech, in which he's saying that it is a speech which we have forgotten. And Aryan here, again, the question is, when Sri Aurobindo is using the Aryan, is it in the dualism of the Aryan and the Mlecha? Not, but we need to clarify that. But in terms of the retrieval, that we need a new language building on the ancient, primordial, and the eternal, where language has that energy, and a new yoga of speech and silence.